So I've set up a little worksheet that I think can make things easier. As you know, there are 4 steps in process costing system. Determine the total number of costs that need to be costed, determine the equivalent units produced, define and develop the cost and determine the cost per equivalent unit, and lastly, allocate those costs to the units transferred and the value of the ending inventory. So to the left here is really step 1. It defines the total number of units that need to be costed. Secondly, this particular section where we can calculate the equivalent units. Thirdly, we can calculate the cost per equivalent unit. And then lastly, which we'll do right down here, we'll determine the cost associated with the units transferred out and the balance in ending inventory. So, per our problem, which I hope you can see here at the top, the beginning inventory was 400 units. We started an additional 15,000. So in actuality then, there were 15,400 available to be produced during the period. However, our ending inventory was 1,000. Therefore, by simple subtraction, we know that we transferred out to the next department 14,400 units. Now we have to cost out those 14,400 units, and we need to determine the value of the remaining 1,000. Our balance sheet has to be right. The cost associated with our inventory as it moves through, the cost of the product as it flows through the various steps, and ultimately to properly evaluate and cost our cost of goods sold. Well, now let's get into the equivalent units. For the sake of making sure that everything is accounted for, these 400 units in beginning inventory were 75% complete from a conversion standpoint, material standpoint, and 50% with respect to conversion. Now that's interesting, but it's irrelevant to our calculation. The only time that would be relevant is if we were using the first in, first out method, which I don't believe you're using. There is an appendix in your text or in most texts that will adjust FIFO, but the weighted average method has its limitations, but at the same time, it's the most commonly used. We started these 15,000 units, which again is interesting but not relevant to determine equivalent units. But these 14,400 are. We absolutely finished those. They were complete so we transferred those out. They have all the material they need, and the direct labor and the overhead that's been added allows the product to be complete up to that point. It's now going to go over to another department where some additional value add is going to be done. But of these 1,000, if we look at our ending inventory assumptions, those 1,000 were 80% complete with respect to conversion. Therefore, we did the equivalent of 80% of 1,000, or 800. And with respect to those 1,000 from a conversion standpoint, they were only 40% complete, so we did the equivalent of 400. Summing these two numbers together, we get 15,200 equivalent units of material and 14,800 equivalent units of conversion. Okay, so we've done the first 2 steps in the process of costing under process costing. Now we have to get into the actual dollars now. Now we're talking about money. So I will point out one thing. Just remember that the units transferred out plus the equivalent units in ending inventory of both material and conversion are added together to get our total equivalent units of production. Now, in the case of these 400 units in beginning inventory, they had a value. Referring to our process cost worksheet illustration, the total value of that inventory was $5,100, of which $1,800 of it was material and $3,300 of it was conversion. Over the course of the month, we added an additional $312,000 of cost. And the makeup or the components of that $312,000 were $97,000 of material and $215,000 of conversion. So adding everything up, 97,000 plus 1,800 is 98,800. 215,000 added to the 3,300 is 218,300. And for the sake of just completing this little worksheet, our total cost is 317. By the way, that's a critical number because what we transfer out and what remains better equal 317,100. So now the next step in the process, which is step 3, is to determine what is the cost per equivalent unit. Well, the equivalent number of units material, so I'm going to put a divide sign here, and I'm just going to write in 15,200. And then I'm going to divide the conversion costs by 14,800. So I'm going to get my fancy calculator here because I haven't done this problem yet. And any calculator will do, even this cheapo one that I get with my iPhone. And I'm going to take that $98,800 and divide it by 15,200. And I'm going to get $6.50 is the cost of the material in this product that we incurred in total per equivalent unit. Now, doing the same thing with conversion costs, I'm going to take the 218,300, divide it by the 14,800 equivalent units, and I'm going to get $14.75. The sum of those two numbers is $21.25. We now know the equivalent cost of material, the equivalent cost of conversion, and the total cost of one unit as it gets ready to be transferred to the next processing department to add their value add. So now we're at the last step in the process. That last step in the process that we're going to discuss now is, what is the value of those 14,400 units that we transferred out? Well, that's quite simple. What got transferred out is the 14,400 units multiplied by the cost of that unit, or $21.25. Well, $21.25 times 14,400 is $306,000. We had 317,100 in total to play with. So if we subtract $317,100, we now know that the value of our ending inventory, is $11,100. That's it. That's how I believe this worksheet is set up in a way that just drives you to the right conclusion.